Okay, so Pokémon, a media franchise behemoth that took the world by storm in the late 90s, was loved by all, including teachers who confiscated cards to give to their own children or sell them. Pokémon was so influential on our tiny little brains because it combined a dangerous set of ingredients. Bright colours, weaponizing fear of missing out, child-friendly gambling, and perfecting that late-stage capitalistic hellscape on the playground, separating the have and the have-nots. I mean, if you didn't have Pokemon cards, or at least Pokemon Red or Blue loaded up on a Game Boy, you were shunned from the playground. I mean, you wouldn't even be worth spitting on. Now, when it comes to Pokemon, I didn't even know where to start. I mean, there's been so many iterations since I last checked in. I mean, what color are they up to now? Like Colorbond Monument versus Soylent Green? So today I think we should keep it simple for the most part, focus on the series that captured my heart as a young innocent child, before the world taught me to hate. I'm talking, of course, about the OG Indigo League series. Upon watching the series recently, I couldn't help but notice how messed up it actually is. Now, don't get me wrong, I still have a soft place in my heart for Pokemon. I mean, I've been known to participate in the occasional Pokemon rap, and, I still have all my original VHSs and my original trading cards, including a Charizard from base set. Now, we could talk all day about how having a Charizard from base set elevates you amongst the common peasants of society, but I think we'll focus on the topic at hand today. Da 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 da. Do 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 do. Now, this would not be a Nathan Rants video without throwing some shade at some parents. Let's start with Brock. The guy that's named Rock with a B, because he's the rock Pokemon guy. Now, I don't know if there was a lead poisoning incident in the Pokemon world, but the parents in this show are outrageous. Brock's dad left his family to go on his own egotistical Pokemon journey, and when he failed to become a Pokemon trainer, he just straight up doesn't return to be a father. Instead, he ends up living on the outskirts of the city in a $25 lumberjack costume he bought from Spirit Halloween, selling rocks to people in a town known for having a surplus of rocks. I love how when they were drawing Brock's dad, they were just like, let's just draw Brock and add some lines. So I guess the lesson here is that if your dad has left your family, go check the outskirts of the city for anyone selling tufts of grass. It might actually be him. Try and rip off the beard just to be sure. And poor Brock couldn't catch a break. Even his mother left the family to go on her own little journey. Yes, I know the English dub implies that she's dead, but this is fake news because in the original, she's not dead. In fact, she shows up later on in the series, proving that she is alive. In any case, she left Brock to look after the other 9 siblings at the ripe old age of 15. So these two parents create an astronomical carbon footprint by having 10 children and then just leave them to fend for themselves. Words cannot describe how much I want these two to be lowered into molten lava like they're a T-800 Terminator. Now, there is a running theme of parents being non-existent in this series. I mean, look at Misty, for instance. Her parents are so non-existent, they don't even get a shout-out, not even a mention. With the parents gone, Misty and her siblings were forced to look after the Cerulean City gym, which led to Misty being bullied and excluded by her sisters, to the point where she left the gym to roam the city as a 10-year-old child, sustaining herself purely on a Goldeen diet. Even Ash's parents are cooked. I mean, not much is known about Ash's dad, but according to the original creator, Ash's dad left the family to go on his own Pokemon training journey. I mean, is there a law in this Pokemon universe that every parent must breed a child and then leave to go on their own Pokemon journey? Apparently in a more recent episode, Ash had the opportunity to meet his dad, except his dad bailed on the opportunity and instead left a hat there for him to say sorry. Can't possibly cancel your Pilates class to meet the son you abandoned many years ago. I'm sure a hat will make up for the years of therapy Ash will have to go through later on in his life. Now that I think about it, maybe that's why Ash is so obsessed with becoming the world's best Pokemon trainer. Maybe if he achieves that, his dad will finally learn to love him and respect him. Gotta catch them all. Ash's mum, on the other hand, is the only parent that's stuck around, so I guess we've got to give her props for that. But I feel like she's too supportive, I know that sounds crazy, but hear me out. Ash is 10 years old, alright? And she's completely okay with him roaming the world with a rodent who's prone to electrocuting him randomly and doing the bidding of an old man who lets you name his own grandson. All because he wants to be a Pokemon trainer? I mean, when I was 10 years old, I wanted to be a fireman. Do you think my parents put a hard hat on my head and gave me a garden hose and said, look son, a burning building, go live out your dreams? And why isn't he going to school? I mean, it's established there are schools in this universe. And don't tell me he doesn't need to be educated, because that guy routinely puts out Charmander against rock types and has Pikachu boxer Hitmonchan. And don't start thinking that the Pokemon world is relatively safe. May I remind you that Ash actually died? Like, he literally got crushed by a chandelier, which is a very fancy way of dying. And remember that one episode when all those kids went missing because those eyes wide shut 1%ers were hypnotizing people with insomnia with a hypno, but all the hypnotic waves were exiting the building and affecting the general population? 3 days later, those kids were found in a park all thinking they were Pokemon. Who knows if a child ate another child because one thought he was a Pidgey and the other one thought he was a Caterpie. There was probably a kid floating face down in that pond over there thinking he was a Magikarp. My point is, would you really want your 10-year-old child roaming about in this world? And you can even look outside the main characters. There are loads of examples that showcase an urgent need to call child welfare. There was that time that guy that looked like Hitler crossbred with a potato dangles his child outside of a helicopter and drops him. And when he finds that kid several years later, completely feral, his best solution is to beat the kid unconscious and drag him back home. Okay, slight detour, but what in the Hans Christensen Pamela Anderson was even that episode? So after being lost for several years, the kid shows up wearing a tiger skin toga. Where did he get the tiger skin from? Are you telling me this kid at the age of 7 killed a tiger and fashioned its skin into a breathable yet understated toga? And don't even get me started on the ending where the parents decide to live with their son in a Kangaskhan pouch forever. I mean, there's just loads of examples. Remember that time that girl hired Ash to beat her dad in a competition so he'd stop neglecting his family? This series has more trauma than a Hollywood child actor. Da 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 da. Okay, this series has so much creep factor you wouldn't be blamed for thinking it was a Nickelodeon production. I don't know if Brock has been eating too many hormone-injected Farfetches, but something ain't right with that boy. Look, I'm not going to act surprised that a teenage boy isn't above looking at a papaya in a microwave and thinking today's the day he's going to be a man. But Brock is a borderline sex pest. I mean, he would crawl on broken glass for 3 hours if it meant he could get a glimpse of Nurse Joy's exposed ankle. Literally any time a woman shows up with a pulse. Actually, not even a pulse. Remember there was that time he wanted to bang a statue of a dead woman? I mean, this dude keeps a book describing every woman he's had an interaction with, like that's totally normal behavior. I'd say law enforcement should be keeping tabs on the guy, but considering he's hit on the whole entire police force, I think they're already doing so. At the very least, they demonstrate that he does have some boundaries. This is a kid's show, right? Speaking of creeps, Team Rocket, specifically Jesse and James, who probably should catch a restraining order. I mean, what are they? A couple of adults who relentlessly and obsessively stalk a 10-year-old child in order to steal his pet. And no matter how many times those two are sent off into space at the speed that would break the sound barrier, they just come back the next day in peak health condition. They're harder to get rid of than Windows Update pop-ups. I mean, I didn't even know if Jesse and James knew what they were doing halfway through this season. I mean, I get that they were trying to catch Pikachu, but it's pretty well established that he's actually the worst. I mean, he loses most of his battles and the little shit won't even take a Thunderstone. And I just don't get why they don't just rob Ash at gunpoint, you know? Charmander can tail whip all he wants, but a bullet to the brain is super effective. Although maybe Team Rocket didn't want to get the episode banned, like that one banned episode where the Safari Warden points a handgun at Ash's head. I mean, I guess Team Rocket already had one strike because they got an episode banned when James showed off his Jigglypuffs. Finally, let's talk about the Pokemon in the room. A Pokemon that's appeared in more nightmares than Freddy Krueger. I'm talking, of course, about Mr. Mime. Now, this little creep smells more than a youth pastor on ketamine and would have you believe that he's wearing clothes and has hair. But it's all a lie. That shit's its body. Those little blue tufts on its head, that's not hair. That's a horn made out of bone. Same with his shoes. It's like a deformed toenail that begins at the ankle and is curled round to give the illusion of a demented elf shoe that's made out of keratin. And his highly fashionable red bulby shirt? It's all flesh and it's all equally disgusting. Oh, and that smile. That never-ending blinkless smile that tells me that if the FBI raided Mr. Mime's PC, Mr. Mime would be facing a very long jail sentence. Da 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 da. What am I doing? Okay, probably the most messed up aspect of this whole series is the weird relationship humans have with Pokemon. It showcases a world in which cockfighting is the #1 profession. People capture Pokemon to beat other Pokemon to capture those Pokemon to then have those Pokemon beat other Pokemon. It's like some weird avant-garde multi-level marketing scheme, but the prize at the end is to inflict as much pain and torturing on as many Pokemon as you can. And if you are a Pokemon, you better hope that you make the battle team, otherwise you're stored away in a PC for eternity. I feel like the creators were somewhat insecure about this aspect, so they go through Olympic levels of justification to help minimize the criticism that might come their way. They routinely include scenes of trainers talking about how they actually care about their Pokemon, but it's juxtaposed against scenes of Pokemon almost dying so their trainer can get a badge from a gym leader that they probably bought in bulk from Alibaba. Like, remember that one guy who has the voice of an extra from South Park?
Nothing would stop us from reaching our dream.
Yeah, the guy that beats his Pokemon so they're better in combat. At the end of the episode, they have this guy hugging his Pokemon and really trying to emphasize that he really cares about them, just so the little kids watching at home don't cry themselves to sleep as they try and process why this guy was trying to drown his Sandshrew. Let's hope none of the kids at home tried this on the family dog. Even Ash's treatment of his own Pokemon is highly questionable, no matter how many Butterfrees he releases for a feel-good moment. When he and the crew come across a dying Charmander, they establish very quickly that it needs urgent care in a hospital. And Ash's first reaction, completely unhinged, goes, "I'm gonna battle it." Now, I don't recall the first step of CPR being beat the dying victim. At the end of the episode, Ash and his crew try and convince the Charmander to come with them because the original owner only wants to use him to win battles. And the Charmander's convinced and he goes with Ash, who then subsequently uses him only to win battles. And in just a few episodes later, Ash pits Charmander against a Mankey, who gives Charmander a big enough concussion that would wipe out any childhood memory Charmander might have left. Then there's the Bulbasaur episode that's so absurd it trumps the fact that they came up with a Pokemon that's just a bin bag called Trubbish. Basically, the episode's about a lady called Melanie who created a sanctuary in a forest to help revive Pokemon that were nearly beaten to death and creating a safe space for Pokemon to get away from the endlessly violent trainers. The Pokemon become so relaxed and carefree that they don't want to leave the sanctuary. And who can blame them? All that's awaiting them out there is an endless chain of beatings, from trainers who want to capture them and enslave them, which will result in an endless chain of beatings. Ash and the crew love Melanie for creating this sanctuary, but then it gets kind of weird when the Bulbasaur, who's acting as a bodyguard for the sanctuary, wants to leave with Ash. But in order to do so, Ash has to, you guessed it, beat Bulbasaur to near death right in front of Melanie, which makes perfect sense. Just the idea that Pokemon want to be captured by trainers is pretty odd when you think about it. Imagine the life as a captured Pokemon. You know, you're trapped in a little tiny ball for an indeterminate amount of time, probably no sunlight, then suddenly you're released. Your eyesight's a little bit foggy as you adjust to your surroundings, and the moment you have clarity, you notice a Charizard 5 meters away, just about to engulf you in flames. But don't worry, even though you're on the brink of non-existence, you're taken to a Pokemon Center that seems to have more locations than Subway. And then you'll be revived so you can get back out there and be curb stomped by Hitmonlee. Pokemon Centers themselves need to be investigated. Like, you can't tell me all those creepily identical Nurse Joys don't thrive in a world where Pokemon are routinely eviscerated. Every time they revive a trainer's Pokemon, they say, "We hope to see you again." Like, that's not a totally weird thing for a hospital to say. And have you ever wondered why the healing service in the Pokemon world is free? It's not because they've embraced socialism. It's because Nurse Joys are demonic beings who feed on the pain and suffering of other beings. And I think we can safely say we've all known a Nurse Joy at some point in our lives. Okay, well, I think I've completely exhausted this topic, and with everything that I've said in this video, I can't stay mad at Pokemon, you know? Could be worse. Could be Digimon.